Good morning, everyone. We are waiting for a few more people to log on to the webinar, and then we will get started shortly. So if you give us a couple of minutes, then we will go ahead and get started in probably like 2 minutes. So if you have any questions in the meantime, go ahead and place those questions in the chat box on your monitor, and then we'll start answering questions towards the end of the presentation. If you have any issues with the webinar as it pertains to the PowerPoints or anything like that, you can call in on the webinar platform as well, and the phone number for that is area code 816-666-7600, and the PIN number is 846146 and #. So again, that phone number is 816-666-7600. The PIN number is 846146 #. Again, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the American Indian Alaska Native Tourism Association's webinar series on grants and funding resources. My name is Glenda Toledo, and I am IENTA's Education Manager. Today I will be serving as your webinar moderator. For those of you who are not familiar with IENTA, we are the only national organization that defines, introduces, grows, and sustains American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian tourism that honors traditions and values. We provide tourism-related education to tribes across the United States, and in this webinar series, we are working with our federal partners that have grants available for tribes. Today, we are presenting the National Park Service resource for protecting and developing cultural, natural, and recreation tourism assets on how and where to find funding for your tourism projects. And if you have any questions during the presentations, please type them into the chat box on your control panel. I'll facilitate the questions and answers at the end of this presentation. And our presenter today, you'll see him on your screen, is the Tourism Program Manager for the National Park Service, where he coordinates engagement for the travel and tourism industry and facilitates collaborations in support of destination management and responsible tourism that benefits parks, visitors, and communities. In addition to providing external coordination and representation of the National Park Service at tourism industry forums, trade shows, and meetings, he collaborates with program areas throughout the agency to support tourism-related planning and management in alignment with the mission of the National Park Service. Please welcome Donald, also known as Donnie Ledbetter. Go ahead, Donnie.
Great. Thank you so much, Glenda. And hello, everybody out there. Thanks so much for tuning in to the presentation today. I'm really looking forward to sharing some information with you about some of these resources available from the agency, and hope that there's something new that you hear about or some more details about maybe a program you've just kind of heard of before, but maybe are inspired to reach out and engage and learn a little bit more about them. Just logistics-wise, I want to mention, you see if you're streaming the video, we've got a lovely backdrop that is a little nicer than my usual office in DC that we put up, so a little bit nicer looking. But one of the quirks is I found just now that every now and then my overhead light in my office won't detect that I'm here and will turn off. It probably looks like the sun going down, maybe on your end. So I might, a time or two, literally jump up and have to wave around and turn that light back on. But we'll roll with the flow on that. I think we'll have plenty of time to go through some of these programs I want to talk about today, and then have time for any follow-up and questions and other information. So with that, I'm going to just get started here, and we will have a slide deck that I'm advancing that you should be seeing along with the video stream as well. Okay, so just to share a little bit of information about me with you and my program. So I am the Tourism Program Manager for the Park Service. I'm based in Washington, D.C. I've been with the agency almost 9 years now, and in this position for just over 3. And it's a program of one person, so it's just me in DC looking at these issues, which may sound kind of odd, but what I've found over time is that the Park Service has kind of an interesting relationship with tourism. We don't often refer to tourism and tourists. We refer to park visitors. We don't exactly have tourism plans and tourism strategies. I think historically the agency has actually considered itself a bit apart from tourism, the tourism sector and tourism systems. So actually a lot of my job, I spend time talking with my colleagues and working to advance the idea that the Park Service very much is part of the tourism sector, and we're a very important and influential component of it actually. And I think there are benefits to be gained by engaging with tourism and destination management and destination development. And I know there are a lot of my colleagues out there that think in that direction as well. And so trying to kind of move that idea forward and find ways to collaborate with the travel and tourism sector. And that certainly includes with tribal tourism development and planning and management. Let's see, I've been with the agency, about 9 years, and that takes up a lot of my time. And then another part of my job is maintaining our relationship with partners like IANTA or Brand USA or the Southeast Tourism Society, and bringing the Park Service to those tourism forums, conferences, and conversations. So just a little bit about my program, and hopefully keep building it as we go forward and have more to offer and more capabilities. I also wanted to share, just for a quick second, my own personal experiences with tourism in Indian country. And really my first experiences didn't come until after college, almost 20 years ago. I went to work on small expedition cruise ships, so about 100 passenger small vessels that cruised in North America, Central America, and the Caribbean. And so my first experiences were as a crew member, facilitating the passengers' experience when we were visiting First Nations communities in British Columbia, or Indigenous villages in Panama, or certainly Alaska Native communities in Southeast Alaska. And in addition to those being great personal experiences and learning a lot and learning different perspectives and different histories and different ways of seeing the world and engaging with the world around us, I started asking questions about, well, how did this experience come to be? When we were in an Embera village in the Darien jungle in Panama, how did the community decide what to share, what this experience was going to be like, how it was going to be structured and managed? What about the economic impact of it and the equity behind that? How were all those decisions being made? And I may not have asked them in such a articulate way at that time, but that's really when I started being curious about sustainability in tourism and responsible tourism management and destination development. And I'm just glad that being with the Park Service now, I can have some small role in trying to move those issues forward and continue working in this space, certainly with tribes and tribal partners, communities across the country, and so on. So it really is a privilege to keep working in this space, and I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to do so. So today's agenda, we're going to look at, I'd like to give an overview of the National Park Service just for some context and set the stage for the presentation. We're going to dive deeper into some historic preservation resources, and then some community technical assistance programs, one in particular, and then make sure you have plenty of points of contact afterwards. So to get started on those, I've got a slide up here with a map of the National Park System and 3 components of the National Park Service that I want to think about for the sake of today's conversation. So first is the National Park System, definitely the most visible and well-known component of the National Park Service. Second, I want to share some information about some designations and programs that the National Park Service helps manage for a little more context, a little more information about some of the other work that the agency is involved in. And then we're really going to spend most of this presentation on community assistance, on number 3 there, and a couple of programs in particular. Now, before we do that though, I definitely want to talk about number 1 for just a couple of minutes. The National Park System, certainly the most well-known aspect of the National Park Service. If you've got the slide up, that system's all the green on the map, 419 units across the country. And as everybody knows that's on the call today or with us today, long before there was a National Park Service, before there were national parks, before there was the United States, these lands and waters were the homes of the indigenous civilizations that have been present in North America for thousands of years. And as a result, the basis, the foundation of that park system is coupled tightly with that generational trauma that has resonated generation after generation, still confronts us today with very challenging and emotional and difficult issues around how we manage these places, who manages them, who gets to make those decisions, issues about access, issues about the benefits of these places. And the National Park Service approaches those issues and those challenges and those conversations guided by a complex set of laws, treaties, regulations, consultation policies and processes. There's also the role of the Department of the Interior, the role of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And across that mosaic of that system, there are definitely a lot of very positive and creative and beneficial collaborations that have happened in particular places between particular parks and particular tribes or communities. There are definitely many challenges and setbacks across that system as well. Now, the staff that are mostly engaged in that kind of work, that park-specific, tribe-specific work, certainly includes park-specific staff, but also we have tribal liaison staff overseen by someone here in DC, and then a network of tribal liaisons that work across the country mostly, often in our regional offices. And those kinds of park-specific, tribal-specific issues, I would ask that for today, if that's a point of intersection for you personally, you have an idea or a challenge or a proposal that is very park-specific, tribe-specific down at that scale, my office definitely can play a liaison role, and connect you to further resources, be a conduit to a conversation. In fact, some of the folks that do those jobs are here in DC this week, and I was sharing with them this presentation and their agreement. Absolutely, yes, they're there to be points of contact. But for today's conversation, we're going to focus a little more on those broader technical assistance and grant programs that are open to anybody, that are much more widely available to communities and tribes wherever you're located, not necessarily park adjacent or have a historical affinity with a park or connection to a park. So my office isn't directly involved in a lot of those park-specific processes as well. So again, my office is definitely a conduit to that, but today we're going to focus on these larger programs and resources. So definitely wanted to talk about that as we move through the program today. So now I do want to take a look, though, at some of these additional designations and programs managed by the Park Service, and some of these will come back up as we're talking about grant programs. So in addition to the National Park system, the National Park Service also oversees the management of some other designations and programs that contribute to the preservation, conservation, providing access to and recreation opportunities to cultural and historical and natural resources around the country. So that includes the National Trail System. There are National Historic Trails and National Scenic Trails, historic landmarks, that we're going to come back to that one, natural landmarks. There's a Register of Historic Places. You've probably heard of that. Much of this you have probably heard of, but I want to highlight it for our conversation. A National Water Trail System, wild and scenic rivers, and all of these programs, partnership is the key. A lot of these are implemented with community partners, different municipalities, states, nonprofits, other federal agencies, tribes. There's a massive mosaic of organizations that operate in these spaces and around managing these kinds of resources. So I definitely wanted to mention those and have them in our mind for the conversation. And then third, we're going to spend today really looking at a couple of community assistance programs that I want to make sure people are aware of. So on the screen, this is a screenshot of a community assistance directory that we have in the Park Service. I've got a hard copy here. I'll show you the website where you can download this directory, and I highly recommend taking a look at it. Now, the directory covers a lot of ground of the different programs that we run. And we're going to focus again today on a couple of grants and a couple of technical assistance programs. I do want to talk about and kind of coach the expectations or guide expectations, for this directory and these programs. And I say that only because in the 9 years or so I've been with the federal government, sometimes I look with envy at the Department of Agriculture and the Forest Service and the massive portfolio of development and rural development and assistance programs that they have. Not all of them specifically tied to tourism, but my tourism colleague, Toby Bloom at the Forest Service, is often able to really talk about millions and millions of dollars available in loans and technical assistance and grant programs just want to say that our programs are a little more modest. Our mission is a little different at the Park Service. So just kind of setting expectations. But we do have programs that we're very proud of and very happy to connect to tribes and tribal communities to bring these resources to bear with you. So just keeping in mind some of that scale and the difference in the missions between the organizations. So that's the website here. I'll pause for just a second where you can download the directory here. And then we're going to focus specifically on some heritage grants and then technical assistance programs. So there's that website if you're interested in getting that directory. And it's the PDF you can download right from that website. Okay, so let's start with heritage, cultural preservation, historic preservation grants. Now a little bit of this, if knowing the audience on this call, you might know some of this already, but I'm going to give a little more detail and more information for folks who may not have all of it. So historic preservation, and just let's look at the history of historic preservation programs in the United States. You may have heard of the Historic Preservation Act and the Historic Preservation Fund, so that's what we're going to focus on here for the next few minutes. In 1966, the Act was passed, establishing federal and state programs to implement historic preservation. And state historic preservation offices were established at that time, often called SHPOs, the acronym. Starting in 1992, tribal historic preservation offices, the establishment of those began, often called THPOs. And at the same time, that register I mentioned earlier, the National Register of Historic Places, the light went off, the sun went down, but I think with the light from my screen, I'm just going to keep going. The THPOs began being established in 92. I do want to talk about the funding mechanism for the Historic Preservation Fund for a moment. In 1976, Congress set up a mechanism to fund the fund that was not taxpayer-based. So royalties accumulated from leasing, oil and gas, leasing and production on federal and some Indian lands onshore and on the outer continental shelf. So every year, this fund is authorized to a maximum of $150. It does not get appropriated to that level every year. Congress still has to appropriate the funds every year, take that step to put the money there so it's available. This year, a very high appropriation, I don't know if it's a record, but a nicely high appropriation of $118.7 million funds to be used for historic preservation. Now let's take a look at how those are distributed and the different programs for them. And here's a look of the last couple of years of the fund actually getting a nice increase in appropriations over the last few years, which may be surprising. A lot of talk of potential budget cuts and trimming programs, but the fund has been nicely appropriated increases the last couple of fiscal years. Now we're going to take a look at a couple of specific grant programs that are implemented by the National Park Service. So on the top line, you see that the state historic preservation offices get a chunk of that appropriation, and the funds are divided among those offices, and there's a formula that's used to figure that out and divvy that out. Somewhat similar process for the tribal historic preservation offices. A good chunk of that money is divvied out to those offices through a formula process. But there's also a competitive grant component for this that I want to really highlight because that can be more widely applied to, submitting applications to that. And then we're going to look at a couple of the other grant programs that are not specific to tribes but are open to either THPOs or to a federally recognized tribe. So here's some of the funding trends over the last couple of years. And as I mentioned, nicely increasing the total over the last couple of years, and usually meaning total for each of the specific grant programs as well. Now let's take a look at this year. I'm going to skip over, pretty quickly the formula grants that go to the tribal preservation offices, the THPOs. And my colleagues who administer these programs have a very close relationship with those offices annually and talk and are engaged a lot. And they're also very aware of the tribal heritage grants that are competitive, but I also want to make sure this audience and the tourism-related folks that I engage with are also aware of this grant program as well. So this year, $500,000, the total pot to award in grants, with a per grant, a per award ceiling of $65,000. And these are open right now. This is a grant program that's open right now for about another month and a week or so. Let's take a look specifically at some of the details here. When this grant, when these cycles open up online, there is a web page at nps.gov where those announcements are made, and there's also a listserv. There's a there's an email subscription option that we can connect you with to make sure you're aware of these. And this is also a grant program cycle. I always make sure IANTA is aware of too, so those announcements go in the newsletters. There's a tricky aspect to the timing of knowing when these are going to be open, because we have to wait for the budget appropriation from Congress. It means we have the funds as an agency. That then means we can open the grant process. And as you know, year after year, the timing of when we get that is variable, let's say. And so we just can't say with certainty when that'll be. And so that can be challenging. That can really affect the timing cycles of things, because you also have to get them going quickly enough that they'll be out the door, to the awarded agencies within the fiscal year. Now let's take a look. When you do click over to pursue this grant opportunity for the competitive heritage grants, those are managed through a portal called grants.gov, and this is a screenshot of the grant opportunity for those competitive heritage grants. And you can see some of the details, when it was posted, the closing date, some of the financial information. And under related documents, if you've ever applied for a grant before, that's where you'll find the application documents, application guidance, and the other requirements that you have to submit for this grant. Not too complicated. It has basically the requirements that you would expect: project descriptions, budget justification worksheets. There's the ability to submit different images that they may want, and there's guidance for this whole process here posted at grants.gov. So this program, to me, in the cultural heritage, cultural tourism, heritage tourism space, this grant program is really the closest we have to offer that can be described as supporting cultural heritage tourism, indigenous heritage tourism development, and even management. Maybe one day my office will have tourism development grants, to award to parks and partner communities. We'll cross our fingers that can happen one day. But this program I really look at as being supportive of the identification, preservation, informed management of even interpretive and educational elements to cultural heritage that then become components of a tourism product, a tourism experience, a tourism activity for the market. So to me, this is kind of one of those foundational resources and set of funds that can go into that development process. So that's why it's what we're going to really highlight today. And a couple of examples, both last year and from some prior years I wanted to share. This is last year's winners, and there are a couple of projects in here that I would absolutely identify as contributing to tourism and heritage tourism development. The simple locating and identifying cultural resources, getting an inventory and then eventually a management plan around the kinds of resources that a community has to preserve, interpret, and can be experienced. Establishing a historic register, archiving materials, even establishing a tribal historic preservation office, this grant can be used for that, which then, those offices then have access to other grants. So there can be a process there as well. And in prior years, I wanted to highlight two specific examples that were even more direct. So the Owens Valley Paiute Shoshone Cultural Center, and then the Makah tribe, also a cultural center, a museum. A couple years ago, grants that really directly went into tourism development, tourism training, tourism product development. So for Owens Valley, Tribal Interpretation and Education, a grant that funded programs and exhibits for the cultural center. And then I really like when I saw this one, guide training. They were developing new museum and community tours, funds for workforce development, for the guide training. Often a really important and challenging aspect of tourism development is that workforce piece. And here in our cultural, heritage preservation grants, some resources for that workforce development piece. So that is a look at that heritage grant, that competitive grant program. open every year, and definitely the main one I wanted to highlight today. Let's also touch on 3 other programs that are open to tribes, but also have some eligibility details that make them a little bit different. And they're also open to a wider community, however. They're open to a wider pool of applicants, so there might be more competition there. So Save America's Treasures we'll start with. This one used to exist, and then it went away for a while, and now it's back and has gotten some good funding in the last couple of years. This is a program that funds preservation work on nationally significant historic properties and collections. So how do you meet that criteria of what is nationally significant? Well, the way this grant is administered, it means the property or collection must be listed as a National Historic Landmark, listed in the National Register of Historic Places, or be a collection of national significance, and that has some criteria. Well, the hitch here, I would say, is that there may be many legitimate reasons that a community, certainly a tribal community, but any community, might not want a structure, a site, a building, a cultural property listed on a national list of that sort. There are things that, for various reasons, a community may, keep internal or just not want it to have that sort of publicity and visibility. So certainly is a criteria and a piece of analysis, that would have to be considered before approaching this grant program. That said, properties that are, on the register or listed can apply for this, and funds go right into preservation work of ensuring the integrity, of cultural heritage and historic assets that, again, become tourism products, components of a tourism experience or opportunity. So again, we're kind of talking about maintaining those foundational assets that are part of heritage tourism. So who can apply includes federally recognized Indian tribes, Alaska Natives, and Native Hawaiian organizations. One great example I found in the Navajo Nation, the Council Chambers, built in 1935, is on the National Register. And so back in 2002, a considerable grant awarded to fund roof repairs, plumbing updates, and really put some money into that building and ensure its integrity. So a really beautiful end result too. So Save America's Treasures, definitely one to highlight, and a pretty well-funded grant program. A similar program, but with a little bit of another hitch to it, Historic Revitalization Grants. This one's relatively new, and $7.5 million this year, so a fairly modest pot. Also supports historic preservation work for properties, and again, the properties must be listed on the National Register. However, this one is targeted to rural communities with populations less than 50,000. So this was an effort to direct some of these historic preservation resources into those communities. And another interesting component about this grant funds must be sub-granted to organizations within their jurisdiction. So it kind of has a secondary effect. A grant awardee organization then sub-grants the money to a local contractor or a local organization that implements the rehabilitation work. SHPOs and TIPOs. This one to highlight is limited to the tribal historic preservation offices as well as the states, certified local governments, and some nonprofits as well can apply. So a newer program. Last year's recipients, I didn't see, as far as I knew, any TIPOs as awardees. City and Borough of Sitka, I noticed last year, but definitely something that I think is we wanted to promote and raise awareness of and make sure it was on the radar, and maybe something to highlight to a TIPO if you have one in your tribe. Finally, underrepresented community grants. This one's a little different. I keep mentioning the National Register. If we're going to have a National Register of Historic Places, the idea is that it should be representative of the width and breadth of communities, cultures, histories in the United States. So sometimes if a community, if an organization, a municipality doesn't have the resources to nominate, to do the inventorying, assessment, and nomination process to have something on that list, this is a grant program designed to lend assistance for that part of the process. So this is a little bit removed, from cultural tourism development. This is a process to support the inventorying of, analysis, and nomination of properties and sites to the National Register. Then, of course, that makes them eligible for other grants. So kind of a third degree out, supporting grant program, but one that is open to TIPOs, federally recognized tribes, Alaska Native groups, Native Hawaiian organizations. Wanted to be sure to highlight it, and actually found several examples in prior years of tribes utilizing this program and having that contribute to a management component of a property and even a cultural property. The White Mountain Apache tribe, a note that it supported nomination of, I'll call it Mount Baldy, as a traditional cultural property. So several grant programs, some targeted just to tribes, others more open, but these are annual, and anyone wants to learn more, connect with the grant program managers, we can definitely make that happen. And I absolutely see these grant programs as basically our largest source of monies that can go into cultural and heritage, tourism development, and management. Now let's pivot to our technical assistance program. And this is the second one I really wanted to highlight on the call. Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance, RTCA, has been utilized by tribes in the past. I've got a couple of really cool examples that we'll take a look at. But RTCA is a program that brings technical assistance to community-led natural resource conservation and outdoor recreation projects. So it's not a funding mechanism. One of their skill sets of the RTCA staff is to help identify funding mechanisms, funding strategies. But RTCA brings technical assistance to help a community who has an idea, has a vision, has a natural resource, asset, space that they want to better utilize, needs some management, that could be developed into a real recreation asset and opportunity that recreation-based tourism can be built on top of. So again, in my mind, a program like RTCA is one of these resources that helps develop the components of tourism opportunities, tourism products, and often here in the recreation or outdoor or natural ecotourism kind of space. So let's look at RTCA and a little more of about the program. So these are the services they offer. There are about 60-ish RTCA staff working across the country. They typically do not work in parks of the National Park System. They're in communities, sometimes housed in universities, sometimes in our regional offices. But they are really designed to, this program brings expertise from the Park Service out into communities to connect people to those natural spaces, natural places that are close to them and that, like I said, recreation tourism can be built on top of. And these places and these spaces and these opportunities and this recreation, every bit as important or as influential, to people as the rest of the lands in this country. People connect close to home, recreators travel regionally or even nationally. So this is just a great program that brings really good technical expertise into these kinds of projects. So the staff do things like help define project vision and goals, engaging partners, figuring out that partnership piece and that participation strategy, developing concept plans, trails, water trails, parks, natural areas, the management plans, concept plans for them, identifying funding strategies, frameworks to figure out organizationally how a project can move forward, and concrete management plans, action plans. So a really nice portfolio of skills that also among themselves, they're continuously sharing best practices and lessons learned and developing the resources of the program. In my opinion, it's a really maybe lesser known, but really impactful at that community level, very useful program of the National Park Service and something I think they do just great work. And a lot of them these days, I'll tell you between you and me, are getting more and more involved in straight up tourism development. A lot of their projects, the organizations, the applicants, the implementing communities or organizations are increasingly often having a tourism, often recreation tourism development motivation, is a clearly defined part of the project as recreation and outdoor-based tourism becomes so popular and many communities, looking at that as a development opportunity. So RTCA, it's been really interesting. This refers back to the comments I made earlier about how we talk about tourism at the agency. More often approaching tourism development, understanding tourism systems and the different components, and so just some exciting work, and I'm happy to be promoting them. So a look at the application form for a typical project, pretty straightforward. Project descriptions, the organization you represent in your role, how the community will be supportive and engaged, commitment from partners. RTCA has found in the past that a great indicator of success is a partnership approach to a project. There are multiple organizations or offices or whatever it might be giving support to a project. Also, I'll mention that the cycle for applying for RTCA assistance is open right now. But I recommend actually these staff that are located across the country, really any time of the year is fine to reach out and connect with the most regionally relevant RTCA staffer, getting to know their capabilities, their bandwidth, their priorities, establishing that connection, and just starting to, investigate whether there might be an opportunity to apply for assistance can happen any time of year. And I know these folks, are open to hearing from interested communities at any time. And we'll make sure at the last slide, the website for RTCA with contact information, we'll put that up. I wanted to share two really interesting projects that RTCA has been involved with the last couple of years that are tribal specific in terms of resource development and with a tourism component. So this was a really great project. The Maidu tribe in Northern California, not far from actually where my wife's family is from. So this is somewhere I hope to get to next time I'm over there. Really, really great story about a valley. I'll call it Humbug Valley, but they call it Tasman Kojum. Historically, a tribal area, belonged to, and for thousands of years, was important to the community. And unfortunately, for quite a while, inaccessible to the tribe and owned and managed by a Pacific Gas and Electric Company, so a public utility, having access and management to this area. Well, the good news was that a couple of years ago, I think almost 15 years or so, the public utility actually was under bankruptcy. Originally, ownership and management of the valley was going to be handed over to the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, but fortunately, through a stewardship movement, a stewardship agreement, ownership and management of the valley turned back over to the tribe. So that was, victory number one. But an important component of it was bringing back traditional tribal ecosystem management practices into this area, coupled with some creative and forward-looking innovation in terms of how to utilize this beautiful area in the Sierra Nevadas as a recreation area, as an area that could welcome tourists, that can welcome recreation tourism, and also expose those visitors to the history, heritage, and culture of the tribe. So a nugget of an idea and a desire to do this. And I'm just pausing because on my end, there's a circle. Oh, okay, I thought the video stream might have been interrupted, but I think we're good. So there was an idea, a germ of an idea about how to develop this area for recreation opportunities. RTCA came in and played a project coordination and conceptualization role, and then resolved, just bring up a photo, included many other things too, but some very concrete concept plans and documentation about the technicalities of next steps of permitting. I'm so sorry if I'm pausing just a second to see a message from Glenda. Video stream did pause, but I think we're okay now. And if not, I'm just going to keep going because we're almost done and the video is not too essential. Hopefully read. So moving this project forward from an idea to some more concrete concept plans and pointing the direction forward with some different funding strategies, and also kind of a layout of some of the technical permitting and other aspects that would have to move forward to move the campground and cultural park idea forward. there's some great visuals of what the concepts are that came out of the project. And it is continuing as they're now exploring different funding combinations. 10 million. Kahora is the executive director of in the video stream. Sorry for any technical difficulties, folks. I'm going to end the video stream. Well, I apologize for any audio difficulties. I'm so sorry about that. I'm on a headset just on my landline, so I think audio. Oh, thank you, Scott. I appreciate that. I'm not sure if a couple folks had problems. I think it's only a couple folks who were having audio problems, and maybe everyone else is okay. Well, okay, thank you. Thank you, Lola. All right, well, just a couple more slides with RTCA projects, and I think we'll pause there and then have time for questions. So thank you. And again, I'm just going to close the chat box for a second, so not too distracting. So great project, great example from RTCA, and wanted to share that one with everybody. And then finally, a second project, the Kalispel tribe. So here, the community had a community forest that was theirs, and we're looking for ways to better utilize it. Use it as a tourism space, recreation tourism, access to the forest, layered on with, interpretation and educational aspects as well. Kind of a similar dynamic, an idea, a vision for better utilizing this asset. And RTCA came in and again, played a project coordination and community engagement role and produced a community forest action plan that addressed all of those components, but also brought some cohesion and unity and agreement with different community voices about the way forward. And that, honestly, I think is one of the things RTCA does best, is kind of that mediating role and walking people through a process. I love there's a photo up, if you've got the slide deck still, of a lunch that was held during one of these community meetings. And we all know that sharing, breaking bread and sharing food and drink is an important component of establishing trust, of clearing the way for ideas and collaboration. And I just love that, that was one of the project elements and wanted to share. And on the last slide, you can see some of the more concrete action plan meetings where they're taking a look at potential projects, project criteria, what the implications of different ideas would be, and how to kind of move that forward. And another testimonial from the Kalispel Tribe Natural Resources Department attesting to RTCA's ability to give a framework, bring the technical planning skills. Again, I really just wanted to highlight this program. I think it's broadly available, across the country, no matter where you're located. And so really wanted to raise awareness because this is, to me, our most powerful technical assistance resource for tourism development. Okay, now I'm going to end. I wanted to share and just raise awareness about the group I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the call. Another group that is open to being a point of contact and an entree point into the National Park Service, and that is our Council for Indigenous Relevancy, Communication, Leadership, and Excellence, CIRCLE. I've been privileged to engage with these folks over the last couple of years as I navigate tribal tourism and being a resource and having a role in this space. Again, I'm a guy, a government bureaucrat in DC, I recognize that, and wanting to bring the resources of the Park Service and also help try to find the collaborative ways forward. And that's really tricky when, the Park Service, like I said, has never really approached tourism straight on, calling it tourism development, tourism management. So it's a work in progress, and I have found these colleagues of mine to be incredibly welcoming, and the recommendations they give have been incredibly important. And so I wanted to just raise their flag again to let you know that we do have this great group of employees inside the agency that are happy to be points of contact, facilitate a conversation as necessary, as well as our official tribal liaison folks. Okay, I'm going to pause here on the last slide with some contact information and some of the websites that cover each of the programs we talked about today. So with that, I am opening up the chat box again, and that's the presentation today. I hope you learned something new or some more details about something and are interested in following up on some of these. And I am absolutely available to make a connection to a grant program, find that RTCA point of contact, or of course answer any other questions that I can for you and be a point of contact. So thank you again for that opportunity today. And I think I'll pause and turn the moderating back over to Glenda.
Thank you for providing us with valuable information on grants and funding opportunities available through NPS, Donnie. We'll go ahead and take some questions now, and as a reminder, make sure to type in those questions in the chat box in your control panel. And right now we do not have any questions, but we have several thank yous, and of course our technical difficulties section we got all those chats. So if you have any questions for Donnie, please note them in the chat box. Okay. But if you have any questions at all for Donnie or for anyone at the National Park Service, okay, Lisa has a question, Donnie. It says, why is the term competitive used for some of the grants?
Great question. I would say that it just means that because some of the grants are not competitive. So the pools of money that go to the state historic preservation offices and the tribal, those are formula grants where they're basically evenly divvied up among those eligible recipients. So competitive, I would say, is simply in contrast. It just means to differentiate between the ones that are not competitive to receiving applications and instead are competitive grants. Nobody can apply.
So a lot of these programs, grants and funding opportunities are available to tribes and Alaska Natives and Native Hawaiian organizations. So, you know, take the opportunity to apply for these grants and any additional funding programs. And we have, IENTA has a number of federal partners that we're working with this year and the next few years. So each month we host a webinar for each of those federal partners, and next month is going to be National Endowment of the Arts. So that webinar is going to be held and and on our website, and if you have access to the internet again, we're also recording, we've also recorded this webinar as well. So look for that in an email that will be coming to you soon in the next few days, sending a link to our website. And as I stated, our next administration regarding the Real ID enforcement. So if you have any questions, again, My email address is gtoledo@ienta.org. Thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to having you next month. Have a great day.
Thank you all.